How about yours?
I think I'm good. We're on.
Hi. Thanks so much for having us here. This is amazing. There's a huge audience. I can't believe it, actually. The previous talks were incredible, and thank you, George and Alex, for organizing, and all the others involved. I'm Charlie. I'm from Toronto.
I'm Ryan. We'll get to that, but we're going to start with a little short film to start.
We're having audio problems. Is this,
That's plugging the wrong cable.
oh, the cables are right.
No, because I cut it.
Yeah. Good?
Hang on.
That's okay. There we go. This here's our third day of paddling. We're on Lake Michikamau. Yes, sir. Here we are, day 2, and this is paradise. Black flies right now are absolutely terrible. Pause it there and go into.
All right, I think I'm on. All right, the George River. I'm Ryan, and I am a photographer who lives and works in Boston, Massachusetts. I just finished my graduate degree. I got my master's degree in Boston, and Charlie and I have known each other for a number of years. We grew up canoeing in Algonquin Park at Camp Pathfinder. A number of the rivers that we've done together collectively as a group. So as part of our project, 2 summers before that, I had paddled the Moisey River. Going north is incredibly expensive. I'm sure many people know, and as part of our project, we needed to come up with a way to finance the trip. Part of the trip. As a photographer, I was looking to also try to produce a body of work. And I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Kickstarter, but Kickstarter is a micro crowdfunding site. It's a website that you can go and propose a project, a book, a CD, a sculpture, something with a very definitive endpoint. And you can put it online, make a short video, a project description. For myself, I proposed making a book of photos, thinking about the Hubbard expedition, kind of in a loosely kind of fictional trip, imagining what it would be like to be out there, kind of finding your way and avoiding kind of starving to death. So launched the Kickstarter project. It was up for about a month, got featured on Kickstarter, which really brought us to a really wide audience. We had backers that came this far from Germany, donating $50, which was the cost of the book that I ended up producing. They also got photographic prints, a number of rewards at different tier levels to help us kind of achieve our goal. As part of the Kickstarter, I kept a blog starting last about February. Every day I would come up with a post, talk about our route, our planning, what we were thinking about, just as a way to kind of communicate what we were doing and share that. So that blog is currently online. We'll put it up at the very end of the lecture so you can go up there. We've got more detailed kind of day-to-day information.
So the group of us, there were 6 of us, and we all know each other from Algonquin Park in southern Ontario, where we went to an all-boys canoe tripping camp. And we come from far and wide across North America. Zach's from Florida, Brian's from Colorado, and the rest of us from the East Coast, Henry from Vermont, Ryan Boston, me Toronto, and Brenton Lakefield. So before we went to the George River, we all gathered together in Lakefield to begin outfitting for the trip.
So as part of the blog, I'd make these kind of little illustrations. There were 6 of us. We ended up buying 3 boats from an outfitter in New Hampshire, used but in great shape for pretty inexpensive. We brought 6 barrels that we put into packs and put a lot of gear around them, so they were really heavy. The total trip was 21 days, but we were out there for 26 to get there and back. In addition, we had 3 packs. I brought 2 cameras. I was shooting on a 6x7 and a 6x9 Fuji, so I brought about 50 rolls of film. We also approached a couple sponsors to kind of reduce some of the costs. So Original Bug Shirt Company was kind enough to give us bug suits or shirts, which was huge. Eureka and Canuck, based out of Montreal, gave us some really important fleeces.
So in Lakefield, we brought the boats and we started outfitting. We had to make them whitewater ready, so we put in float bags and knee pads and thigh straps. We went over the map so that we were familiar with the route. It's 800 kilometers long and crosses huge bodies of water, the Smallwood Reservoir being the second largest reservoir in the world. And we outfitted all the food there too.
It was a lot of check-in safety. One of the devices I'll talk about in a minute was a spot pager. But we left Lakefield and headed up, stopped off in Quebec City to spend the night with friends. The drive in total up to Labrador City and the Smallwood Reservoir was about 24 to 26 hours roughly on the road. With the canoes and the weight of all the gear, we kind of stopped and kind of kept a reasonable pace. We were worried about the boats. Here's just a quick slide of our crossing. And then from Baie-Comeau, it's roughly dirt roads up to Labrador City with a fair amount of truck traffic. So the roads are in pretty good shape.
And then we're finally on the Smallwood Reservoir. This is our entry photo. I think there's a bit of an optical illusion. I think I'm standing in a divot there. But
it's good to point out. One of the things I wanted to mention, too, about cost, when we had done the Moisey, we took the train up from Sept-Îles, and one of the things that we really needed to consider was keeping costs down on flights in and out. So the route, although it was a lot more challenging paddling massive bodies of water, we needed to find a spot that we can put in by car. And then at the end of the trip, we knew that we would have a flight back, and we kind of had been watching those flights. So using the spot pager, these are all of our campsite GPS points along the trip. It was about 800 kilometers. We were roughly doing about 40 to 50 kilometers a day.
And at the beginning, we just kept falling behind by 10 kilometers and 15 kilometers until by day 6 or 7, we thought that we were behind by almost 65 kilometers. So
we had maps that we were using that I guess in one of the overlays added about an extra 20 kilometers that we had failed to realize, and kind of numbers lining up before we left. But the way that we've broken down the trip and kind of making it digestible is 21 days. We've kind of divided into six sections, starting with the Smallwood. As Charlie said, the Smallwood Reservoir is just an enormous body of water. We probably spent the first 5 to 6 days paddling it. And before we left, we had really big concerns about weather and temperatures and all the rest. We were overall fairly fortunate, but our first night on the Smallwood, it became pretty clear that the water levels on the reservoir were a lot lower. It made for wonderful beach campsites, and as you saw in the video, we had a pretty fantastic bonfire on the first night to celebrate. That was very safe, I promise. But it made for navigation issues. It made it a lot of the topographic features that you would typically see that you kind of reference on a map were harder to tell when the water levels are a lot lower. We were also trying to stay close to shore as often as possible in case there was, any sort of concerns with wind, weather, waves. We also had the first 3 to 4 days storms that just kind of would blow in really suddenly. So it was very, very cold, and we weren't expecting that to be as cold in July.
And so we'd be sitting in our boats, seeing a thunderhead rolling in, and we'd be like, "Oh, we got tons of time, no problem." And then within seconds, we couldn't see the bow of our boats because it was raining so heavily on us. So it was amazing to watch the weather work its wonders. And when we woke up in the morning, sometimes it'd be like absolutely freezing cold, frost on our tents, and then by midday we'd be sunburned. It'd be 35 degrees Celsius.
Let's go back one for. I want to point out on this. This was kind of towards the end of the Smallwood. We were almost windbound at this point. We had been kind of sticking to small channels, but every now and then a channel would kind of end and the water was low, so we would kind of lift over a little body of land and then kind of scout. Quite often we'd be trying to go straight across here, but we would end up kind of hugging the shoreline, which would add a couple hours. And as Charlie said, we found ourselves kind of falling behind at the beginning, which, caused a little bit of nervousness. But our hope was that we knew we'd kind of catch up once we were on the river with a little bit more current.
And we were with a guy, Zach Aram, who must have been raised by black bears at some point because he was just like always 4:30 in the morning, ready to go, waking us up, and, we were off. So onto the height of land. The Smallwood Reservoir, you climb a few streams, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a marsh. And that's great. It's really pretty. There's cotton growing everywhere and these mountains in the distance, but it became exceedingly difficult to navigate. Once up in the height of land, we had to send people up mountains to photograph and scout out where the next body of water was, because at some points we found ourselves so low that you just couldn't tell what direction to head in. The water didn't flow, and the land didn't show any definitive signs of where we were.
And you saw our kind of solution to this. The gear was so heavy, and we had concerns about ankles and rolling ankles and putting on these heavy barrels. So we came up with the idea to what we called the Labrador bobsled, where we would leave the gear in the boat, and all 6 of us would slide the boat across the water. The water was just below these plants, which was a result of brain rot, I like to refer to, but we were laughing and having a great time doing it. So it made hard work. That day ended up being about 14 hours of canoe tripping.
So it didn't take long for us to lose all sense of sanity, and we would have these random outbursts of just like uncontrollable laughter for 10 minutes or just sadness. It was a really interesting
very
combination.
highs and lows.
So here we are. We had pushed through the height of land. We had overcome these big bogs, and this was a 14-hour day. Right here, it's probably 10 p.m. We're starting dinner. The sun would set around 11:30 and be up by 4.
But with the water level, as I said, being a little bit higher, you went from great beaches to kind of bushing into the shoreline. So this was kind of one of the roughest campsites that we had on the trip.
We had, actually, this day is interesting. We get into the lake that we think we're going to camp in, and having had low water and beaches for the 5 days before that, we get to this new lake, and the water is choking up into the spruce bog around it. There's absolutely no place to sleep. I suggest curling in a tarp and lying down somewhere. The guys didn't dig that very much, but we busted out the Snickers chocolate bars, and it was like the greatest thing I've ever eaten in my entire life. It was complete euphoria for about 4 minutes, and then we were back to it.
Then making our way from some of these larger lakes into kind of the headwaters of the Upper George, which started off, again, very kind of low, and the whitewater was very technical to start. Often we'd stand off to the side, we'd scout the route, walk down, try to get as best of visibility, eddying in and out as often as we could. We were running everything fully loaded. And as you can see in this boat right here, we had kind of 2 barrels that we'd kind of jam in there with kind of 2 packs and a kind of personal pack that would be upright. flotation, kind of thigh straps and helmet cameras, lots of cameras going on.
And just because we got the photo of this shot, it was a low-risk sort of situation, but a lot of the whitewater we were in became much more technical. We couldn't pull over to take photos of ourselves, and often we had to climb up onto these very tall islands in the middle of cascading waterfalls.
So here on the map, you kind of see some of our waypoints across the bigger lakes heading towards the Three Gorges, which is a convergence you see on the map up to the right of kind of two channels of the George River that meet, surrounded by lots of small islands that made for very difficult navigation. And the map, lists up to R6 in some of these canyons. So we were kind of hopping on islands as we were getting closer, and it was really loud, and you couldn't tell what was around the corner. So we were kind of very safely kind of eddying across things, running across things, ferrying, and then getting to a point kind of looking for a trail. And, nothing was really marked. So, you're kind of out there looking on your own. Just a kind of a typical shot of us running. This was just a beautiful campsite. The Upper George looks completely prehistoric. There's a mountain that you can see off on the side that we had seen throughout the couple days leading up to it, and this campsite was just beautiful.
So that's our last slide of the Upper George, and we flipped through it quickly, but sometimes it felt like an eternity being on the Upper George. It's funny because when you see these presentations, it seems so easy. Like some of the presentation yesterday, 11,000 kilometers around the continent of North America. It's like, and you see it in 25 minutes, you're like, that's not so bad. But yeah, I can only imagine. After day 5, our hands were all like puffy and swollen with bug bites and sand and wind and water, the wet, dry, the blistering and the cracking, and we're still trying to do buckles up and so.
And the nervousness of running some of these sets, they're really big and they have high risk, and we're all well trained and had Z drag, rescue kits and all the rest, but it was very much about safety for us.
So the Upper George it sort of expands into this 90-kilometer-long lake called Indian House Lake. It's an incredible place. It's lined by these beautiful Labrador ancient mountain range. And we were lucky enough that as the current stopped, the tailwind picked up, and we rigged up our bug tent to the bows of the 3 boats. We pontooned together, and we ripped across the lake. We came up to this sand dune. It's an esker in the middle of Indian House, and you could climb up to about 200 feet where it plateaued like a golf course. But you wouldn't want to play golf there because there was just millions of divots of caribou hooves that had just trampled the land, and then wolves there too. It was amazing to see the tracks as they kind of told the story of the plateau.
At this point, we were slowly starting to kind of gain some ground, so we started having a little bit more time to go on hikes and kind of not just kind of put your head down and paddle all day, which on some of those days we were working really hard. But this spot, this lake, was kind of the beginning of us really starting to kind of appreciate where we were. We had crossed the height of land from Labrador into Quebec at this point. So,
and it really was the Upper George that gave us the challenge that we had to meet every day, 10 to 14-hour days paddling on the Smallwood Reservoir also. And then we got to this kind of paradise, and it became very, very surreal, and it was like the payoff was incredible.
So this is a pretty fun shot of us kind of moonwalking down the side of the sand hill, and you kind of feel very zero gravity for a moment. And
at the end of Indian House Lake, there's this wedge point, and there's an authentic Innu travel destination called Ashini. So basically, this was a place where the Innu would gather, hundreds of Innu would gather for the migration of millions of caribou over the course of history as they were channeled down through the geography and had to cross the lake. And as they did, they would be speared by the hunters. So it was a place of great festivity. There's now this destination you can go there where they teach you all about the culture and the history and the technique. And you could walk through the land and see these plateaus where large gatherings and huts would be. And it was totally surreal to be in a place where you felt like you were completely alone, completely disconnected from humans and the rest of the world, but then to realize that everywhere you stepped, there had probably been thousands, if not millions of feet that stepped there before you, though no longer.
The Lower George was just spectacular. This is a shot kind of looking upriver from Pyramid Hill, And we had kind of put our boats down at the bottom at this point and kind of hiked up this way, and through the trees kind of spotted a couple bears on the hillside that had kind of crossed the other way. So we felt pretty good, came up to the top, and I guess we'll share a little bit more about that. At this point of the river, we were seeing lots of wildlife.
There we are, just kind of celebrating on the top of this mountain. The wind was absolutely ripping. You could jump and be moved 4 feet over, and felt like you might just get pulled off the top of the mountain altogether.
The views were just, you could see for 20 or 30 miles both directions. It was pretty stormy at the top, but thankfully we kind of caught a break where it wasn't raining, and you could really enjoy it. We were up there for a little while. So at this point, we've kind of caught back up. The river kind of pushed us along, and the sailing down Indian House Lake helped us catch up some time. So there you see a photo of Zach kind of sitting off. This was the river is actually off in the background on this shot. And this was kind of a high gorge kind of lake that was featured on one of the topo maps that we decided we wanted to walk up and check out. So we spent the morning up here, and it was breathtaking.
The bugs were terrible. So these are the Pyramid Hills. Again, like, the landscape is incredible. You get the sense of just a timelessness, and these mountain ranges are 1 billion years old and have been eroding for all that time. So it just feels like a very sort of ancient world that we've entered.
And that would be a pretty typical set as well, where we would kind of pick our way down things. It wasn't just one large kind of feature, one clear route. You could kind of, it was kind of like being a marble through a bed of nails.
So here we are, kind of gathered on the side of the river. There's these tributaries. That's what you see on the right there, beautiful waterfall. The water there was crystal clear. Like, you could swim down. I brought swim goggles, and see trout just kind of like popping in and out of the bubbling holes at the bottom of these falls. It was amazing. And actually at this site, I was woken up by a black bear the next morning. That was awesome. I thought it was Zach. They're hard to distinguish sometimes.
Towards the end of the trip, we hadn't seen anyone for about 21 days. There's a number of kind of outposts towards the bottom, caribou, hunting lodges and whatnot for the fall. And we had encountered a lodge that took us in. We had coffee and cookies with them and had a really great kind of conversation. But he did make us aware that there had been more polar bear sightings coming further down into the George. And that recently a woman had been mauled, and that we should be aware that they're not white at this point, that they look like dirty brown rocks. Yeah. So
we were always confusing dirty brown rocks for polar bears at that point. And paranoia kind of crept in.
So we were pretty nervous, but you can see up in the map, I'd say about the last 75 kilometers have some sort of tidal influence as you're padding into Kangiksulujuak. So we decided that it would be safest to stay on an island that night, and kind of stopped when the tides were starting to reverse. At that point, the island was very large, and we kind of had hopes that it would stay very large.
The island was 30 feet high and had just this rock escarpment that you had to climb up and drag all the boats up. So we thought we were perfectly fine on top of it.
Got comfortable, but knew that we needed to continue to assess the tides, and throughout the night would kind of use our best judgment to see if we'd be packing up the tents at midnight or.
And it was an amazing night. There was the best northern lights we had seen. These green serpents like flicking across the sky, and full moon also at the same time. And we kind of watched the tides come up, and eventually the tide is in the bushes. And we had thought it'd stop at the bushes because, then it'd drown out the bushes. There wouldn't be bushes there. They'd be rocks. But apparently the bushes really like that regular watering. And actually almost the entire island becomes completely submerged by a 35-foot vertical tide. So by the end of it, we have everything packed up into our canoes except for one tent. I think Ryan was like,
determined to sleep.
We shall not move, and the tide shall not pass. And he's got his paddle there, and they're marking where the water was and where it is and backing up, and they're pinned between the water and the tent. And then finally it recedes, and we were all just like, took a deep breath and slept 2 hours before we had to get up.
But at this point, you could also see how wide the river became. And so we were, again, playing it very safe. It was very cold, very windy. The tidal currents were very difficult to read. It was kind of like paddling a set of rapids and not kind of telling what was happening. And in this photo, we were actually getting out to kind of bail some of the water that was kind of coming over the boat and just kind of riding it out and just trying to stay as balanced as we could. This is where we ended, in Kangxwalujjuaq, which was really just beautiful and clean and gorgeous and bright, and we had a very friendly welcome, we were very cold when we arrived, so it was great to get here.
It's a town of about 800 people on the southern tip of Ungava Bay, which is the Arctic Ocean, and they were amazing people, just like very shy but very curious too, and very warm, friendly people. So it was that was an amazing sort of place to finish the trip.
We also have a big thanks to Air Inuit. They somehow managed to fit all of our gear, our paddles, our packs. They requested that we wear our helmets. Well, Charlie wore his helmet, and that we.
I was scared of flying.
Yeah, it was his first flight, and then we had our dry bags and life jackets and cameras kind of all attached. But for all of us to fit into this small 8-seater, then we flew from Kangxwalujjuaq to Kuujjuaq and then back to Labrador City, and. From that project, all the photos and the videos that in the presentations were from all of the guys. They're fantastic photographers as well. And as part of my Kickstarter project, this is the book that I just finished. I just picked it up a week ago, so I'm really thrilled to have it here for its kind of premiere. And it's available on the table, and we encourage you to visit our blog, which is featured at the end of the conclusion of this part of the video. So enjoy.
Another day on the George, the water hole. Ready? Yeah, we're ready. Catch some fish. Did you catch?
Today. This is the 4th bear we've seen in the last 18 hours, and the 2nd one and 3rd one that we've seen in the last 20 minutes. It's a big black bear. I can't tell if it's a female or a male. We are upwind of it.
Oh,